Thank you for joining us and choosing to listen in on this LLU Continuing Education Certification Best Practices. For those who choose to get credit, please take a pen, listen in, and be sure and contact me at betterfamily3@gmail.com if you're interested in getting credit for this Best Practices CEU. Well, let's jump into the reason why I needed to do this session. Well, you know that the month of April is considered, among many other things, Sexual Assault and Child Abuse Month. Okay, so as I do every year, I try to bring some awareness. I wanted to make sure that those who are having any type of contact or outreach for children or daycare, or even if you just have relatives that are in daycare or your own children, I think this particular best practices is going to be very, very good for you to be able to take note of and consider getting your CEU for those who work with children or have outreach programs that involve children. So let's get started. Well, this is what I wanted to talk about quickly. So if you have your pen, listen in and be prepared to take some notes. You will need to provide a 2-page reflection for the credit for this particular CEU. Now, I want you to take a good thought about why it's so important, especially since my topic is about church risk and child abuse reporting. So what's very important about this particular lesson is because working with children, working in daycare, or even babysitting children has become such a real risk today because a lot of kids are coming already abused, already mishandled sexually, and a lot of people are not aware of some things that the church needs to be more cognizant about. One thing I do know is we have a tendency to believe that and we know that it is true that we're covered in the blood and Jesus got us and no weapon formed against us is going to prosper. But we can say that all we want when we're not prepared. And so I want to give you a couple of, church risks that are very, very necessary for you to understand because child abuse is very prevalent in homes that are coming to the church and to daycares and everywhere else. And there are some mandatory reporting guidelines as far as the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act is concerned, that CAPTA is concerned, and it's required that each state have certain provisions and procedures that are required for each person who are dealing with kids, for any type of neglect or any type of incidents that may happen to these children. We are held accountable. Don't matter that they're in a church daycare or a church camp program or just sit and watch them while in church. We've got to make sure that we're paying attention to the mandatory reporting for incidents or anything that you may feel that could be going on with that child. Over the globe, we've got so many issues and so many things that have happened to these kids over the years that it just makes my heart hurt. And although that we have a lot of churches who do their very best to show, protection and nurturing in the lives that God has put to their hands, and many church leaders still are confused, and I'm going to use that word, versus faith and secular requirements for the laws of the land. They're very confused about their responsibility to report any alleged incidents. And a lot of that is to make sure that everybody is covered and we're one big happy family. But what you don't understand, if you are a leader and anyone that works with children, is that not reporting abuse can lead to what they call a child's unnecessary continued suffering. If you think about that, what's happening is that you hear something that's been said by a child or something that's giving you a signal of something that's going on in the child's life, or you've witnessed something and you don't say anything. So there's several different factors that can contribute to the problem. But I do want to say this: the mandatory reporting is a must, and we also got to recognize that as we that are professionals or even clergy, it's very important to know that this particular lesson is going to support those who are social workers. It's going to support those who are teachers in any facet, whether it's faith-based or daycare, okay, or either what they call church school or daycare within the school, or the child classroom for the teens and children. We need to make sure that the teachers the principals or the daycare educators or the daycare providers who are directors, and other school personnel, anybody that's dealing with children. We need to recognize that those people who are doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers and counselors and therapists and mental health professionals even, anybody that's dealing with children, we have a responsibility, and even those people who are close to us as family members or what we call church family. We need to know that even the law enforcement have to make sure that these reporting responsibilities and accountabilities pertaining to any type of situation where a child has been harmed, it's our responsibility to make sure that we take care of the reporting and paperwork concerning incidents that may be going on right in your very home, right in your very daycare or your very place where you have provided a certain type of care or watch care for that child or teenager while they're with you, whether it's on the property, on a field trip, or wherever they are. We've got to understand that we have a responsibility, and we need to make sure that we know what those reporting responsibilities are, and there are several factors that's going to contribute to a problem when we put blinders on or ignore it. Okay, so first of all, I want to get into talking about the situation of the ignorance. Okay, we can be very ignorant when it comes to spiritual matters, and many times we close our eyes when it comes to things that are in the natural realm. And so the ignorance of the law is one of the problems that has come for decades for the people of faith, okay? So as the laws are changing, it can feel very overwhelming because you're trying to keep up with all this stuff and what you're required to do. But guess what? Once you step into the realm of doing other things besides having a family sit inside those on those pews with their child and the child is with them, you went into a whole other realm when you start pulling them and setting them apart. So you've got to understand to learn new information about protection for those that you have been put to your hand to take care of outside of that particular realm when they are not with their parent, okay? Or you receiving information about a teenager that's trying to cry out for help. The second thing is fear of being sued. This is one of the other reasons why we don't get that leader or that church professional or daycare or some type of Christian school. They fear of being sued, for this unintentional filing of false report, when sometimes things are absolutely just uncontrollable or certain things that's concerning abuse has occurred. Many times people feel like this limited immunity from the liability is there to protect them or protect the reporter. Sometimes whoever have said something, then you're trying to shut it down or they don't want it to be exposed any further. It's very important that we try to look at this feeling that we're going to be immune because we feel that we only have a limited liability because we are a faith population or we are dealing with a faith situation or environment. That's just not going to cut it. The other problem is reporting the abuse of someone else at the church. Be very, very careful about reporting it outside of the pastor or the overseer. You need to go to that person first. And perhaps it's going to be the senior pastor. You need to think about reporting it to the authorities. Is very important as well. But you want to go to the senior pastor to make sure that the message or the incident was reported. And now for mandatory reporters, this doesn't go far enough in most states. Many times we tend to just only say something to the senior pastor and don't follow up because it is notorious for pastors today to try to keep it all in the family and not make shame come to the church. But it's too late for that. We got too many hurting children crying out today and too many who are being abused right in the church houses. And then the fourth thing is fear of one's identity being revealed. Sometimes they don't want to reveal the identity of the perpetrator within the church, so they begin to be free or how they say, a pat on the hand or either scolded about why they do this when actually the leader is setting that person up to wind up hurting another child and or doing something that's very, very perverted to that child that has already happened and that many times leaders are trying to cover up. So when you report the abuse to the state hotline, you are assured that you're going to have, this anonymous call to take care of everything concerning the laws of the land, and so it won't be that they're trying to expose you. But here's some answers to some of the most common questions that church leaders usually ask. Well, they ask, do all states are required to give this abuse reporting? Well, yes, it is. Yes, it is. All states are required to do child abuse reporting from mandatory. It is mandatory upon contact of what you receive from someone, upon hearing any type of information that signals abuse, violence, sexual, any type of touching, whatever that is for the child or teen. So many people mistakenly think that you must have actual knowledge of the abuse in order to report it. Having a reasonable suspicion of abuse is enough reason to report. So that means you got to make sure you go to that leader if you're in suspicion that something is going on, and make sure you have your facts together. But yes, all states are required to report child abuse, and any suspicion that you may have, you need to go to that leader. And the next thing is who is a mandatory reporter. Okay. Well, in addition to, of course, doctors, pastors, leaders, child care workers, many states now consider everyone as a mandatory reporter. Okay. So that might mean you have to probably report somebody in your own bloodline or family if necessary. It's going to do you great good to make sure that you're protecting that child and not have regret up the road. So it's very imperative to know whether or not you are a mandatory reporter in your state. You need to go to the www.childwelfare.gov, and you'll be able to see what the laws of the land is telling you about your responsibility, especially as a leader. That's www.childwelfare.gov. Now, if you want to know for leaders, for ministers, people like that, you want to know what the laws of the land are about reporting for your state, you can go to Clergy as mandatory reporters, of child abuse and neglect. Okay? For all other individuals, you want to go to mandatory reporters of child abuse and neglect. So there's one for clergy and there's one for individuals. Now the next thing you want to understand is what is reportable child abuse. Okay? So reportable child abuse includes sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse and neglect. But we need to understand what neglect is. So neglect is the most common type of abuse. It involves so many different facets, but it's about 80% of the reports today is from neglect. And so we need to make sure that you have very, very clear the definition of what type of neglect that you are ready to report concerning child abuse. And so then the next thing is, what is the impact of state child abuse reporting laws on ministers? This is very important, and you need to understand for those who have youth programs or want to do a lot of different things with youth. It's very important that you work on your policy and procedures for safety, because I put out on my YouTube channel there. You can go back. There's several different CEU trainings that I have done, from daycare to individuals on down, for you to understand about writing policy, and everything else is absolutely free on my YouTube channel here, so you can begin to learn more about your responsibility, and wherever you have this child located, their safety and your protection from having a lawsuit. Okay, so what is the impact of state child abuse reporting laws on ministers, leaders? Ministers often receive information about child abuse because of their roles, okay, as spiritual advisors. But because of their exposure to this information, it's essential for ministers to understand their child abuse reporting duties under the state law. And guess what? The state law within your state may be different. But it may be tempting, though, to treat the abuse as an internal matter of the church discipline, which will not work. We're not there anymore. There's too many children getting hurt, too many children that are really being hurt, which is sad to say, right inside the church. So that response is not enough if you are a mandatory reporter. Depending on the state, mandatory reporters may also include church staff and volunteers. Very important. You've got to pay attention, because a lot of volunteers can talk a good talk, and many of us love the way they work, and we're not doing our greatest background checks and things like that because they're in the church or they belong to the church. But depending on your state, mandatory reporters may also include these church staff and volunteers. That's the reason why it's very important that you do a volunteer training in regards to safety and, and the pros and cons and thinking about what they can and cannot do and the pros and cons of what you feel that needs to be in your policies. Very important when it comes to safety. So simple reporting of child abuse to your pastor of the church does not relieve these individuals, these people who are part of or have learned. It does not relieve them of their duty to report. That means that they have to go and report what they have seen or heard. Now, first of all, you went to them. You have responsibility because, number one, it came from you. And if it's in the incident report that you were the one that told the pastor, then they're going to be contacting you. So why not go ahead on? It does not relieve you, and the pastor should know this is the reason why they need to be taking some classes to learn more. So it does not relieve that individual who had that information from that abused child to do their own, it's their duty through their own reporting. A few states will allow a church to designate, so you need to check your laws of the land, to designate a staff member such as a lead pastor or a person that's probably over the child care department or the educational part where the kids are separated out in the church to this person in particular who they can have to report any abuse or any type of information that they need or the procedure that you have written down, who to contact on a hotline in regards to, information that they want to share about some suspected abuse. In most states, however, this does not relieve a mandatory reporter of the duty to report to the state. You are going to have to make that call in regards to any type of abuse that you may feel that is going on with a child or a teen. So the next thing is how does the clergy penitent privilege apply? Okay, so here it is, that PENITENT, the clergy penitent privilege apply. So 32 states have enacted laws excusing clergy from the duty to report information obtained in the course of a privileged conversation, between the minister and an individual seeking spiritual advice. So that means these 32 states enacted these laws to excuse the clergy from that duty of reporting because they've either been in counsel or they've been given certain spiritual advice. You need to be checking your state to see what the state laws of the land are about keeping confidential information private. Certain things, again, you're not going to be able to omit when a child is in danger or a child has been abused. But in these states where this law has been executed, ministers will not be required, of course, by law to report the child abuse, even if they are a mandatory reporter. So you need to make sure that you understand the laws that you're living in, that you're hearing under the sound of my voice right now. But be very, very cautious because this has to be exercised regardless of what you're thinking in the time that we're in now, really, because these laws that were enacted for the clergy to report information based on a privileged conversation, between the minister and the individual who are just seeking spiritual advice, you're going to have to use wisdom to know when to report and use wisdom to know what's very necessary for you to be able to share right then when you pretty much know if you have any Jesus in you and if you got any wisdom to know that the Lord is speaking to you about the safety of a child or a teen, you need to report, okay? You may need to seek some legal advice, of course, to know if that statute applies to your situation or that particular case that you have found out about the abuse. And second of all, even if the privilege excuses you from reporting, consider your sleep test. You might not be able to rest. I know I wouldn't. We might not be able to rest knowing that it's something that was so simple for you to be able to get a call or make sure you tell your pastor or your program director or whoever's over the daycare or dealing with the child that's in the environment wherever you learned the information about. Then if you've done that, you'll be able to go to sleep at night and, and won't be so depressed because you did not report the abuse, okay? Then the next thing is, how do I report child abuse? You want to make sure that you go to your You can Google it and go to your state in regards to the Texas Department of Health and Human Services or Child Protective Services. They're called different things in different states. But you want to call the child abuse hotline in your state. That'll be a good start right there, just to get some directives on what to do concerning the population or the person that you heard. Because sometimes if it's one child in a daycare or something like that, more than likely if the perpetrator is in there, that the child accused of touching them or what have you, it's more than that child that has been touched as well. So you might want to make sure if this is an isolated case or if it's something that's more than one child that you suspect, that it needs to be hurried up to be able to do your assessment to learn if there's more cases. Several states allow individuals to report child abuse to just the law enforcement officer directly. So you might just need to just call the police, if necessary, to make sure you've done your incident reporting and get your case number from the police department. And then what are the risks of not reporting? Okay, here it is. If you are a mandatory reporter, meaning that in your state that you've set up in your policy and procedures that this is a mandatory reporter for your ministry or for your child care provider or the person that's overseeing that youth ministry, reporter that you've designated for someone in your group to be the mandatory reporter or the watchman that's taking care of making sure the safety protocols and safety policy and procedures are going forward. What you have put out there for your children or those that you got in your camp or on your field trip, where they're staying all night and all of that, very important that you understand that you're a mandatory reporter. If they do not, here's a risk. If they fail to report the abuse, meaning that they didn't want to expose or didn't want to ruin the event, what happens is now they have created a criminal penalty against themselves and your organization or your ministry. And usually it may be a misdemeanor, but under state law, in some states, mandatory child abuse reporting is also subject to civil liability for failing to report. So you want to make sure you're doing the right thing to help not only your organization or your ministry and your family, but the most important thing is to help the soul that's crying out and hoping that you will rescue them from this abuse, because a lot of these kids are afraid. Many of them have been told that they're going to be killed. Many of them have been molested so bad that they feel like this is the thing that they have to do to stay alive. So be very, very careful, or to keep their own family alive. They've been told that lie. It's very important to note that every state supplies mandatory reporters with limited liability immunity, okay? So if the abuse reporter is not, substantiated, meaning that they have not substantiated the thing that they're supposed to do, this seems to be in a position where that person or that organization, now it seems to be that it will protect them. If they're doing it based on your policy and procedures and the laws of the land, it will protect them from being sued from a report made in good faith, okay, meaning they told it when and at the most appropriate time and when they knew that they could get to that person to report it without taking it home or without being fearful. So even if the allegations are false or wind up being false, they did their part in the reporting, okay? So how to respond to allegations, okay? That's the next thing. I hope you got your pen. So I have several of these to share with you, how to respond to the allegations of child abuse. So when represented with information about a potential child abuse in your organization or your church pastor, you need to answer the following questions then, and these will help you to respond properly as you strive to protect your sheep, to protect the victim, and even to protect yourself, okay? Because this is something that just goes off the chain when it comes to a leader dealing with or hearing something within their church, and they're not dealing with leadership and not even training leadership on safety matters. We have got to make sure that when these allegations come forth, whether they may find out to be not true or the child misunderstood the touch and they thought it was a different type of touch, then whatever that was, then you are held accountable for, when you do not strive to protect your sheep or that victim who's crying out for you to be able to get the full understanding. So here is how to respond. Number one, the first thing when you hear the allegations, you need to question yourself, am I a mandatory or permissive reporter under the state law? Okay, am I a mandatory or permissive reporter under the state law. You can find that out by going on to find out according to what state you're in about the state law in reporting child abuse. Okay. The second thing, you need to ask yourself the question, do the allegations constitute child abuse as defined under state law? So, sure, it may not sound like that it constitutes it just from what the state law have written, but common sense and even a blind man can see if a child is steady pointing at their private area or crying about something or it's itching or it's burning or somebody did this or that to me, then you don't need to read the law that you need to call the police, okay? You don't need to read the law to make a meeting with your pastor and all of that to know that you need to report this, what has happened to this child or this individual who's crying out. And then you need the next thing, number 3, is you need to ask yourself, do I have reasonable cause to believe abuse has occurred? That's the question you want to ask yourself when you're responding to an allegation. Do I have reasonable cause to believe abuse has occurred? And so that reasonable cause could be just what I said earlier. That person has told you, or you have a reasonable cause to know that this house where these children are living is not safe, or there's a lot of things going on in that house where the child could not be safe, or the teen could not be safe. Maybe the mother's boyfriend, or maybe the child has said things that are alluding to the boyfriend, or they're just afraid, period, because it don't have to always be sexually where it's, how they say, evidence where there's been penetration. It could be fingers, it could be oral sex, it could be a many things that child is incurring because no one is reaching out to see what is going on based on what they have alleged in your presence, whether it was on the church ground or not, but they're there at the church. And clergy need to understand how to respond to these reasonable cause of the abuse or the violation toward that victim. And number 4, does the clergy penitent privilege protect them from disclosing the information? You need to be very, very clear about your penitent privilege. Some of us are believing that just because we're clergy and that we're the church, because we're not church and state is separate. But no, in the laws of the land, you're in the laws of the land. We may be separate from the state and because we're the church, but we have responsibility of the laws of the land. You run a red light, keep running and see if you can get a ticket. You know, I don't care if you pull out your Bible and show your cross. You're going to get a ticket, okay? So we need to understand how to protect ourselves, okay? When it's time to disclose and open up about a situation with your group or whoever's in charge of safety, we need to make sure that when we're dealing with children's church and so on, or any type of outreach that you're going overnight or what have you with the children, you've got to pay attention to your privilege, how to protect these and yourself, these populations. Number 5, you want to ask the question, did the alleged abuse involve pedophilic behavior, okay? That means sexual contact with a pre-adolescent child, someone that's just a real little child, or someone who even may be mildly, challenged in their mental health. We need to make sure that we look at this because the stats have not been able, over decades, have not been able to record cases in regards to those who are mentally challenged, those who are even physically challenged, meaning that they may be physically disabled or what have you, but they still are being violated regardless of where they are. This pedophilic type behavior is very important for us to pay close attention to for these populations in particular, and even the seniors, very important, because we can categorize many of them as children after they get to a certain age and they're not able to speak or take care of themselves the way they can, even though they may be healthy and looking healthy, they could be sexually abused. I had the situation where a parent was being sexually abused by their very own son because of the fact that this person was mildly challenged mentally, and so they were having sex with their very own parent. We need to be very, very careful when we have people in the church and that they're bringing this information to you, telling you something the best way they know how to tell you, and you don't try to get to the bottom of it. God is watching that. Number 6, do I have any risk of civil liability under state law if I choose not to report the abuse? You need to ask yourself that question about the alleged abuse or type of information you're receiving by your staff or even that is coming to you. Number 7, you need to ask yourself, should I discuss the available evidence with the state agency that receives child abuse reports to determine whether the agency believes that a report should be filed? So, yes, you should discuss the available evidence. Yes, you should, with the state, that receives this abuse. So you'll be able to determine it. Yes, you should. You should do this so you'll understand up front you're not just reporting something that you think is something that you are aware of and that you believe has really happened. Number 8, should I try to persuade the informant to report the abuse? Well, we believe that if we are a team and they are a part of your team or a part of your church, then you should have that in your policy and procedures how they need to step and process this type of information when it's been reported to them or they have some type of suspicion of abuse. This needs to be in your policy and procedures so we know what to do, and that includes coming to you, number 1, and then number 2, because you're the overseer, then number 2, what do they do past coming to you, before they get to you? What are they supposed to be doing? Documenting and so on. This is something that needs to be in your policies and your procedures. Number 9, you need to ask yourself, can child abuse be reported to law enforcement officials in any state? You need to ask yourself that question. For more information, you can definitely call, like I said, Texas Child Abuse. So we're in Houston, Texas. Check out the Child Abuse or Child Protective Agency in your area. This way, you'll be able to get what you need. You'll have less risk challenges that's going forth with those who God has put to your hand, and then you'll be able to defend yourself against fraud or anything that may have happened in your ministry or your church, even with volunteers. You'll be able to know what God is trying to show you about what you need to be doing to even hire or allow someone to come in and volunteer in the midst. Now, this is being sent out because April is Sexual Abuse and Violence or Assault Month. I'm excited to announce that I'm going to have one of the most anointed that I have seen in a very long time, psalmist, that's going to come on, and I know you've got the information on Little Boy Blue, but because this month I wanted to get this information out about risk management for churches and leadership that are clergy, you don't want to miss this live rap story about Little Boy Blue that she's going to be doing on the 26th of this month. You don't want to miss it. I pray that God would allow you to come in live and listen to her give this live rap story about Little Boy Blue, and so I'm not going to spoil it. I want you to make sure that you join us so you can hear about Little Boy Blue. It is going to floor you when you hear her. She's such an anointed live rap story. This is one of many upcoming types of what I call drama stories that coming on our Situations Room YouTube channel, and I pray that you'll be able to join us. This one of many, and what she's going to do is share what happened to Little Boy Blue. She's an anointed psalmist, and she is a kingdom-minded storyteller rapper, okay, and she's a host and founder of the radio show, The Gospel Flow. I pray that you would join me to hear this anointed woman of God who is an evangelist, Kimberly Relford, a.k.a. K. Moore. You can check her out on Facebook, but I'm so looking forward to it. This was very important to me, that you need to understand what you need to know in this hour in regards to sexual abuse among clergy in the church. We got across the globe where we got millions and millions of children who are being reported right from the church house, right from that place what they call a camp out or sleepover. Okay, it's very, very important that you get some liability insurance. If you don't have any, if you're a pastor and you have a children's church or whatever, you need some liability insurance because a lot of the kids are lying today and a lot of the parents are teaching them to lie. And so we need to make sure you have the policy and procedures in place. And although churches have this tremendous opportunity, like I said before, to protect and nurture these innocent lives, many church leaders maintain spiritually ignorance when it comes to responsibility as far as alleged reporting is concerned, these incidents of these children that are going through sexual assault or abuse or what I call pedophilic type of behavior from even those who volunteer or that are leading these kids even in children's church. So not reporting this abuse, you hear me, pastor or leader, or those that are clergy. Not reporting abuse, from sexual abuse or any type of abuse with these children, these teens. I mean, we got verbal abuses on the rampage, but we talking about sexual abuse that's happening right in the church. Children are being talked to bad and mistreated bad. But because of the fact that sexual abuse is one of the ones that the kids are so afraid of, and because we got millions across the globe who are really fearful to bring shame to the church or bring shame to their parents, and they don't know what to say or what to do because that person has groomed them to be quiet and put fear in them. But not reporting this abuse can lead to this child continued suffering, and God will be holding you accountable because he's put that soul to your hands. And so you want to make sure these factors that I've given you so far, to make sure that you pay attention to these factors in as far as the laws of the land is concerned. Being ignorant of the law. As the law changes, we're going to have to be intentional about learning the new information that God is holding us accountable to know, both in the natural realm and in the spirit realm. Well, that's all I have for you. I pray that this was a blessing to you, and I pray that you'll be able to share this message with others that are clergy and those who are taking care of kids, whether it's daycare in the secular realm or what they call child care, that is what we call faith-based child care facilities or what have you. It doesn't matter if they're faith-based or not. We have got to make sure that we have our policy and procedures, and you might need to make sure you question the procedures where you're leaving your child in these daycares and or going to these camps. I love you so much. I pray that God will use this as an intervention for your ministry and that you will be able to help others realize some of these things that I brought up a few minutes ago about some of the most common questions that church leaders need to understand and to think about when they have reasonable suspicion about abuse. It's going to be very necessary that you report. It's not a question of if. The question needs to be answered to who and when. God bless you. I pray that you be safe and that you, too, will understand how important it is that we will take care of those that God has put in our hands. I'll talk to you soon.